deeply worrying. Promises are being made and then not delivered upon. Governments of the right and of the left sometimes think national interests are more important than community solutions. What suffers are the refugees and the cohesion of the European Union.
Ich erteile deshalb das Wort jetzt.
I'd like now, therefore, to give the floor to the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear members of the European Parliament, before the briefing on the European Council on the 15th of October and the next steps ahead, I would like to say the following. The crisis, or rather challenge, that we, all of us, as a community, as the European Union, are facing now is perhaps the biggest challenge we have seen for decades. I have no doubt that this challenge has the potential to change the European Union we have built. It has the potential even to destroy achievements such as border-free travel between Schengen countries. And what is even more dangerous, it has the potential to create tectonic changes in the European political landscape. And these are not changes for the better. These are truly extraordinary times that require extraordinary measures, extraordinary sacrifices, and extraordinary solidarity. To me, as a President of the European Council, and I believe to most of us, it is paramount to ensure the unity of our Member States and of European institutions. Together we will handle this crisis. Otherwise, I do not want to think of the alternative. From the very outset of this crisis, I have underlined the importance of protecting our external borders. We do not yet have an agreement on how to do it in operational terms, but at least leaders share the view that our priority must be to protect the EU's external borders. Unfortunately, the situation will get even worse, as I warned this chamber in my last intervention. I mean, for example, the new wave of refugees from Aleppo and the region after Russian bombing attack in Syria. It was more than 100,000 new refugees in a few days. Dear members, during the last European Council, leaders gave a cautious welcome to the work of the European Commission on a deal with Turkey on migration. Here, let me personally thank Vice President Timmermans, who is working hard on the technical details. Let me stress again that a deal with Turkey only makes sense if it helps stem the migratory flows to Europe. This cooperation will not be easy. We should have no illusion that any third country, including Turkey, can replace us in protecting our borders. Second, leaders took stock of work to make 11 hotspots in Greece and Italy fully operational by the end of November. This deadline is ambitious and requires a significant acceleration of manpower and assets to Frontex and the European Asylum Support Office. For now, the European agencies have less than half of what they need. When it comes to the role of hotspots, we have started an honest debate on how they should function. This is still work in progress. Third, we discussed at length how to protect our borders. We must end at once this completely unnecessary argument between the proponents of protecting external borders and the advocates of solidarity and openness. We need both. We need to restore a origin if possible. Finally, we will ask Member States to further contribute to the efforts made to support UNHCR, the World Food Programme, and other agencies, as well as to support the EU's Regional Trust Fund responding to the Syria crisis and the EU Trust Fund for Africa. Dear President, dear members, and finally on Britain. I briefed leaders on the preparatory discussions between my officials and the UK over the last month. We welcomed Prime Minister Cameron's commitment to set out the UK's specific concerns in writing by early November. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Herr Tusk.
Thank you, Mr. Tusk.
Das Wort hat jetzt der Präsident der.
I now give the floor to the President of the Commission, Mr. Juncker.
Sehr verehrter Herr Präsident,
President of the European Council, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues.
along the Western Balkans route, we saw refugees wading through freezing rivers. We saw them sleeping in the rain and mud. Soon, this will be snow and ice. Winter is approaching, and every day counts. Das ist genau die Ursache, Herr Präsident, wieso und weshalb.
This is precisely why, in conjunction with President Tusk, I decided that it was appropriate for us to bring together some member states of the European Union and some 3 additional countries for a summit on the West Balkan route, and I therefore invited them to Brussels. 8 heads of state and government participated in this group from the European Union. The Luxembourg Migration Minister, Mr. Asselborn, participated, and the Dutch representative of the incoming presidency also participated. Obviously also President Tusk was there, and President Schulz attended. And the reason that I decided that it was appropriate to hold this summit is that obviously the refugee crisis affects not only the Western Balkan states but also the European institutions, inter alia the European Parliament. And our assistance is absolutely urgent, not least in terms of budgetary contributions. And we must take this action immediately. I'd like to extend my thanks to the European Parliament because all the proposals that have been put forward by the Commission have been taken up by you, and there's been a great deal of pressure of time. But this has enabled the European institutions to take the necessary political decisions and to implement them in an effective way. I also invited Antonio Guterres from the UNHCR and Frontex, and I invited Albania, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, likewise, because these are areas which are particularly strongly affected by the flows of refugees and the whole refugee crisis. We took this initiative with the Western Balkan states because we felt that it was absolutely essential for the Commission to take hold of the reins in this debate and to be accountable and to recognize that the member states require and wish us to meet this challenge. It's high time that we did so in as effective a way as we possibly can. Of course.
For now our world is changing. Shifting power, west to east. Wars on our doorstep. Terrorism at home. Living longer but reproducing less. These new challenges will need new solutions. And history has taught us that to face the really big challenges, we need to work together as allies, but stand up to those who seek to dictate to us. Our grandparents had the vision to meet the challenges of their times. Our children will face a whole new set of challenges. So now it's our turn to do something for our children and grandchildren. Face today's challenges or retreat to the past. So let's stop sending false hope to the millions thinking of coming here, that they all have a future in the EU. Let's move on from roadmaps and action plans and get on with helping those in need. Let's stop pointing fingers and setting quotas and start delivering. For the sake of the refugees, for the sake of the citizens of our countries, and for the sake of the future stability of this continent.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Colleagues, we are very far behind the original timetable. I just wish to bring to your attention the fact that we're in fact about 30 minutes behind. When we get any request for the floor, we get a great rash of blue cards. Please recall what the purpose of the blue card is. It is to try and bring about greater clarity, and it gives somebody an opportunity to pose an intermediate question. But what we're seeing is that people are sticking up their blue cards before the person has even been allocated the floor. That's not the point. It isn't the point to get yourself a little more speaking time. Mr. Coburn, you had a question, I believe. Mr. Coburn, you have a question for Mr. Kamal. No great surprise that you should wish to put one, but I'd ask Mr. Kamal if he would accept the question.
Mr. Kamal, the only way to control the UK's borders, when will you and Mr. Cameron finally get it into your heads that the only way to control the borders is by leaving the EU? Do you have any other method of doing it other than that? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Coburn, it's great to see that you paid attention to what Mr. Schulz was saying about the purpose of these questions. You will have your chance to have your say when the referendum comes. And let us not forget, it was a Conservative government that delivered that referendum, not you guys shouting from the sidelines. Thank you very much.
Für die liberale Fraktion.
For the Liberal group, Mr. Verhofstadt has the floor.
Mr. President, I think that we shall have more and more of these small British interruptions on the British referendum, but applause, applause. Thank you, thank you. So, dear colleagues, the first thing that I want to do is to say to Manfred Weber that this is not a contest, Manfred, this refugee crisis, between liberals, socialists or Christian Democrats. It's not a contest. In any way, we always lose against you, because if you have in your side Orban, who is a tough guy, and Merkel, who show compassion, you always win. And you're always right. The reality, it is not a contest between us. It is a contest between those nationalists and populists who want to abuse this refugee crisis to get rid of Europe and to destroy the European Union. That's the real contest. And not between us. So let's stop to make accusations to say this government and that government. And the problem is the governments in Europe. Because that is what Jean-Claude Juncker has showed in 25 minutes. And I thank him that he has done it in a very detailed way. What he has said was a long list of decisions taken on the European level and not implemented by the member states for months now. When it concerns relocation, not enough has been done. When it concerns the budget, not enough has been done. When it concerns sending civil servants for the external borders, not enough has been done. The problem is not here between political groups. The problem is that member states are still not understanding that on the European level they can only manage this problem. That is what we are facing today. And there we stand together. There is no reason to make a battle between us, because this battle is only good for them there, by their blue cards, to attack the European project. Because it is an existential crisis that can only be overcome if, based on the Commission, Mr. Tusk, now the Council is deciding on what is, in my opinion, the first thing to do, that is the European Border and Coast Guard, so that we can regain control over our borders. That doesn't mean that we have to create a fortress Europe. That means that it is together, in Greece, in Bulgaria, that we have to control the border, register the different refugees who are coming, making the facilities so that they can live in good circumstances and not with the images that we have seen the last days and the last weeks. And it is there that we can make the difference between those who are economic migrants and real refugees. And it is there where we can organize the relocation. So if I have one plea to Mr. Tusk, then it is, let us work together, Mr. Tusk. I know it's not your fault, it is the Council, that at least in the December Council, they are deciding on this European border and coast guard, because the Greek border doesn't exist, the Bulgarian border doesn't exist. The Greek border and the Bulgarian border, that's also the German border, the French border, the Dutch border, the Belgian border. It is our common border, so that means it's our common responsibility. And that is what you have to decide. Because it is there where the Balkan route can be stopped. It's not in the Balkans itself, it's on the Bulgarian border. In Greece, there we have to create this European border and coast guard that has to be multinational and that has to deal with registering and at the same time also with the relocation. And the second point, I think, is that in the Council, my proposal to you is don't give them a Christmas break to your colleagues in the Council. If they cannot decide now on this common asylum system that we definitely need, and at this common economic migration system that we desperately need, because everybody knows that many people are abusing the asylum system at the end to come into Europe. That is at stake. In December, that's in a few weeks, don't give them a break, don't go on holiday, keep them there in that building, that Eastern European building type there in Europe, where the Council for the moment has his seat, and make these three crucial decisions. And finally, and that's my last plea to you, Mr. Tusk, and I know that you are in favour, take the decision once and forever to give a mandate to Mrs. Mogherini to start also initiatives on her level, on the level of Europe, to end the source of this crisis. Nobody talked about it. The source of this crisis is the ongoing conflict in Syria, and we have looked
Give Mr. Seehofer a ring and tell him that instead of always just letting loose in public, he might pick up the phone and talk to Mr. Feynman and Mrs. Merkel now and again. I think that in his position would be a useful thing to do and would be of benefit to all of us. Let me try first of all in this debate to get something straight. I don't think that we are primarily dealing with a deep crisis of the European Union. Crisis, war, this is what's going on outside of the European Union at the moment, and many other peoples have encountered far more problems than we are experiencing in the European Union hitherto. And if we don't keep trying to conflate this and talking always about our own problems first of all, we'll never be in a position to actually contribute to a solution to the problem in Syria or the environment or Sahara or in the Mediterranean. And it's pretty terrifying for me how navel-gazing we are in our discussions. So I think the big pressure of problems that we're experiencing at the moment and that we keep talking about is really the result of the wrong refugee and migration policy that we've been pursuing now for decades. The European Union felt far too comfortable for too long with this Dublin regulation, which tended to try and limit the issue to the border countries, the countries on the margins of Europe. And if we hadn't had ourselves shaken up by ships and boats going down on the Mediterranean, then we would have maintained this basic level of indifference vis-à-vis the problem in the Mediterranean. So it's not easy at this stage to switch off that way of thinking and to get past our indifference. But I do think that the European Union is strong enough to do that were we to stop trying to break up the European Union as part of that effort. I think, Mr. Juncker, that it is right that the decisions have been taken to do more to help resolve the situation, improve the situation for refugees in Turkey and also in other neighbouring countries to Syria. But what I think is wrong, and this is an old mistake, is that in the attempt to do something right, you ally yourself with a man who in his country is doing exactly the wrong thing. I'm talking here about President Erdogan. There's a big media group in Turkey which has been occupied by the police right now in Turkey and has AKP people put in place. So think very carefully about what you wish to do in continuing with Turkey. I think that the Balkan summit that took place last weekend was quite right, and I think we've finally managed to admit, and this is a bit of a breakthrough, that along the Balkan route we've got a humanitarian catastrophe situation, and the European Union right now is responsible for ensuring that we bring people an opportunity to, because their countries have been destroyed, and the European Union is a space in which it is possible to function to the benefit of citizens. I would only underscore at the same time that I also believe, quite apart from solving the acute problems, that we need to think about long-term changes as well. What are we going to get in place of Dublin? What will future refugee and immigration policy look like in Europe, and how are we going to arrange our borders in such a way that we don't just shut ourselves off or militarize ourselves, as sometimes happens under Frontex, but that we guarantee European values, fundamental rights, and that we bring about a greater degree of, or a new degree of openness in the construction of this new European border policy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Harms. Für die
Thank you. On behalf of the EFDD, now Mr. Farage.
As this migrant crisis begins to overwhelm the European Union, and yes, it is an existential crisis, perhaps we should ask ourselves what really is the true nature of this project? Because I've heard a lot today about rights. Well, what about democratic rights? Because I think what we're seeing is an increasingly authoritarian European Union that crushes democratic rights and then actually crows about it. Every single time there's a crisis, it's national democracy that loses. We saw back in 2011 the Italian Prime Minister Berlusconi, sounding Eurosceptic, removed and replaced by a puppet Prime Minister. We saw exactly the same thing happen in Greece in 2011. Mr Papandreou threatened a referendum on Euro membership. There was a coup against him. He was replaced by a puppet. In this migrant crisis, we've seen 4 countries, led, I guess, by the strongest, Hungary, making it clear they want no part of EU migrant quotas, only to find themselves crushed through EU trickery and made to accept the very thing that they'd said no to. And I'll never forget seeing the Greek Prime Minister, Mr Tsipras, sitting just over there, having won a general election, and then come to this House to be told the manifesto was unacceptable and it must be ditched. But I think all of this has reached a new low this week with Portugal, virtually unremarked upon by the media, and yet for those that don't know, there is now, following the general election, a left-wing majority with a socialist plan for Portugal, and yet the President of Portugal, Mr Silva, is refusing them office on the grounds that they represent anti-European forces, and is allowing the minority Conservative pro-EU Prime Minister to stay in place. This is the modern-day implementation of the Brezhnev Doctrine. This is exactly what happened to states living inside the USSR. What has been made clear here with Greece and indeed with Portugal is that a country only has democratic rights if it's in favour of the project. If not, those rights are taken away. And perhaps none of this should surprise us. As Mr Juncker has told us before, there can be no democratic choice against the European treaties. And the German Finance Minister, Mr Schäuble, has said elections change nothing. There are rules. I think for anyone that believes in democracy, Portugal should be the final straw. It should be the warning that this project, to protect itself and all its failings, will destroy the individual rights of people and of nations. My country has always believed in parliamentary democracy so strongly that twice in the last century it risked everything to fight for parliamentary democracy, not just for Britain, but for the rest of Europe too. And I actually believe that for all of us that believe in democracy and want to see it re-implemented, the British referendum offers a golden opportunity.
Go ahead.
Mr. Farage, you compared situation in EU country Portugal with the situation in previous USSR. I know you don't have experience of living in USSR. We have. Can you please bring example where Brezhnev or somebody else leading Soviet Union was confronting results of democratic elections in one of USSR republics or members?
Well, actually, although I have to say I wasn't around at the time of the Hungarian uprising, it did happen, and we saw a similar one happening in Czechoslovakia in 1968. And just let me tell you what the Brezhnev Doctrine says, shall I? Because I'm sure you remember it. It says, when forces that are hostile to socialism try to turn the development of a socialist country towards capitalism, it becomes not only a problem of the country concerned, but a common problem and a concern of all socialist countries. I think what you need to do is cross out socialist and put European Union, and it fits like a glove.
Das Wort hat jetzt
On behalf of the ENF, Mr. de Graaf.
Voorzitter, mevrouw Merkel.
President, when Chancellor Merkel last week, she went to visit the Sultan of Turkey, and in so doing she sealed the fate of Europe. Turkey gets fast-track access to the European Union in exchange for restricting the flow of migrants. This rings the bankruptcy of democracy, where Germany simply decides for everyone else. The EU abolishes itself and becomes incorporated in the new Ottoman Empire. External borders cannot be made 100% watertight, and yet the restoring internal borders is taboo. The European elite would rather sell itself out to the beast of Ankara. Forget human rights. As Erdogan bombards his own people, as he cooperates with ISIS, abolishes democracy in Turkey, and stifles freedom of expression in violence. Only in 1913 were the Turks definitively expelled from the Balkans, and only then did the murder and rape of Christian populations end. And the EU is bringing back the wars of religion. With Islam, children are raped as brides, women are second-class chattels, and infidels are persecuted and murdered. When Mrs. Merkel says that Islam belongs to Europe, she repudiates all the Christian and humanitarian values of Christendom and makes herself complicit in the abuse in the detention centres, with rapes, persecution of Christians on a massive scale. And that's going to happen in every town and every village. That is Islam, a takeover of the West. And we must stop the invasion, seal the borders, and Turkey must never become a member of our EU. Thank you very much.
Now, on behalf, now we will hear from the non-attached member, Diane Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. President. In listening to this morning's debate, I hope that what we have heard is a more realistic approach to the issues facing European nations in dealing with the flows of refugees and migrants currently heading towards Europe. I understand that many of those coming are fleeing persecution, but I fear that the initial response by some European nations may have consigned even more vulnerable people to trafficking and exploitation by criminal gangs. President Tusk, you focused this morning on the matter of securing borders, concluding that even though deals with third countries are possible, no third country can replace us in protecting our external borders. President Juncker, you indicated that we need to slow down the uncontrolled flow of people. If this is a more realistic approach, it is late but welcome. Of course, it is only part of the answer. It requires a dual approach, stability in the region and promoting policies to encourage economic growth. However, I am perturbed by the tone of some of the leaders' comments in this debate this morning. And let me address Mr Weber's intemperate outburst on behalf of my constituents in the United Kingdom. We are not a nation of the extremes, but a compassionate people who have mandated our government to give aid to the Syrian refugee crisis. In fact, we are the second largest bilateral donor of aid to the refugee crisis in Syria and one of the few countries working to fulfil our Millennium Development Goals. Finally, it is disgraceful that from the President of Council and Commission this morning, while we've heard much about the role of European nations and the need for ever more funding from those European nations, you have ignored the potential contribution of the Gulf states in resolving this very difficult situation. It is time we ensured that these states stepped up to the mark and took on their moral responsibility to deal with this crisis along with the rest of us. Thank you.
We will now hear from Mr Royal from the EPP. President, colleagues, the issue of refugees, this is a huge